The bustling streets of downtown Chicago hummed with energy as Zoe Washington, a seasoned FBI agent, made her way into TechNow, the city's newest and most talked-about electronics store. The sleek interior, filled with shining gadgets and state-of-the-art displays, made Zoe feel like a kid in a candy store. Her fingers itched to test out the latest tablet, wondering how it might enhance her investigative work. As Zoe wandered through the aisles, her trained eyes taking in every detail, she was unaware of the scrutiny she was under. Behind the customer service desk, Greg Palmer, the store manager, watched her with growing suspicion. Greg's gaze lingered on Zoe's dark skin and natural hair, his mind clouded by long-held prejudices instilled by his father, a former cop with a history of racial profiling. Memories of his father's warnings about certain types of customers flooded Greg's mind, battling with his desire to be a fair and effective manager. He tried to shake off the uncomfortable thoughts, but they clung to him like a persistent shadow. Zoe, oblivious to Greg's internal struggle, approached a display of high-end smartphones. She picked one up, admiring its sleek design and imagining how its advanced features could aid in her fieldwork. As she turned the device over in her hands, Greg's anxiety peaked. Without warning, Greg strode over to Zoe, his face set in a harsh expression. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice tight with barely concealed hostility. "I'm going to have to ask you to hand that over and leave the store immediately." Zoe looked up, startled. "I'm sorry, what?" "Don't play dumb," Greg snapped, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "I saw you trying to slip that phone into your bag. We don't tolerate shoplifters here." The accusation hit Zoe like a physical blow. She stood there, momentarily speechless, as other customers turned to stare. The familiar sting of discrimination, one she had hoped was becoming a thing of the past, washed over her anew. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding," Zoe began, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I'm an FBI agent, and I was simply looking at the phone. I haven't done anything wrong." Greg scoffed, clearly not believing her. "Right, and I'm the president. Security," he called out, motioning to a guard near the entrance. As the security guard approached, Zoe felt a mix of anger and determination rise within her. She had faced prejudice before, but this time, she wouldn't let it slide. Little did she know that this confrontation would be the beginning of a journey that would challenge both her and Greg in ways they never expected. Zoe strode out of TechNow, her head held high despite the humiliation burning in her chest. The crisp Chicago air did little to cool her anger as she made her way down Michigan Avenue, the incident replaying in her mind. Passers-by, caught up in their own worlds, were oblivious to the storm of emotions raging within her. As she walked, memories of past encounters with discrimination bubbled to the surface. There was the time in college when a professor had expressed surprise at her academic achievements, the countless times she'd been followed in stores, and even the occasional doubt from colleagues early in her FBI career. Each instance had strengthened her resolve, but this latest encounter felt like a step backward. Reaching her apartment in the South Loop, Zoe closed the door behind her and let out a long, shaky breath. She pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Tanya? You won't believe what just happened," Zoe said, as soon as her friend and fellow agent picked up. For the next hour, Zoe poured out her frustration to Tanya, her words tumbling out in a mix of anger and disbelief. Tanya listened patiently, offering words of support and understanding. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Zoe," Tanya said softly. "But you know what? You're one of the best agents I know. Don't let this jerk make you doubt yourself." Zoe smiled weakly, grateful for her friend's support. "Thanks, Tanya. I thought we were past this, you know? Especially in a city like Chicago." As they talked, Zoe's determination grew. This incident wouldn't define her, but she wouldn't let it go either. There had to be a way to address this, to make a change. Meanwhile, across town, Greg sat in his office at TechNow, a gnawing feeling of unease in his stomach. The adrenaline of the confrontation had worn off, leaving him with a growing sense of doubt. Had he overreacted? Was he really protecting the store? Or had he let his prejudices cloud his judgment? He thought about calling Zoe back to apologize, but pride and fear held him back. What if she really was an FBI agent? What kind of trouble could he be in? As Greg drove home that evening, the Chicago skyline a glittering backdrop to his troubled thoughts, he couldn't shake the image of Zoe's face, the shock, the hurt, and the determination he had seen there. For the first time in a long while, Greg began to question the beliefs he had held for so long. At home, Greg's wife, Sarah, noticed his distracted demeanor. "Rough day at work?" she asked, concern in her voice. Greg hesitated, then slowly began to recount the incident. As he spoke, Sarah's expression shifted from concern to disappointment. "Oh, Greg," she sighed, "you need to make this right. You can't keep letting your father's old prejudices guide your actions." Greg nodded, knowing she was right but unsure of how to proceed. As he lay in bed that night, sleep eluding him, Greg realized that this incident might be a turning point, not just for Zoe, but for him as well. The question was, would he have the courage to confront his own biases and make a change? The following week, Zoe sat at her desk in the Chicago FBI field office, her mind still partially occupied with the incident at TechNow. However, her attention snapped back to the present as her supervisor, Agent Daryl Reynolds, approached with a serious expression. "Washington, I've got a case that needs your expertise," Reynolds said, dropping a file on her desk. "We've got reports of a major money laundering operation running through several electronic stores in the city. Your experience in financial crimes makes you perfect for this." Zoe opened the file, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. "Sir, one of these stores is TechNow. I had an incident there last week." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Is this going to be a problem, Agent Washington?" Zoe straightened in her chair, a determined glint in her eye. "No, sir. In fact, I think this might give me an advantage. I can use that experience as part of my cover." As Zoe delved deeper into the case, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. This was her chance to prove herself and potentially expose the prejudice she had faced. Meanwhile, at TechNow, Greg was facing his own crisis. While reviewing the store's financial records, he had stumbled upon some disturbing discrepancies. Large sums of money were moving through the store's accounts in patterns that didn't match their sales records. Greg's heart raced as he realized the implications. Was the store involved in something illegal? And if so, how deep did it go? As he pondered his next move, Greg couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. He thought about reporting his findings to his superiors, but a nagging doubt held him back. What if he was wrong? Or worse, what if they were involved? The next day, Zoe returned to TechNow, this time in disguise. She wore a blonde wig, glasses, and a business suit, transforming herself into a completely different person. As she entered the store, she caught sight of Greg behind the counter, looking stressed and distracted. Zoe approached the counter, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "Excuse me, I'm interested in bulk purchasing for my company. Who should I speak to about that?" Greg looked up, not recognizing Zoe in her disguise. "That would be me, Greg Palmer, store manager. How can I help you?" As they began to discuss the potential bulk purchase, Zoe carefully observed Greg's behavior. She noticed his nervousness, the way his eyes darted around the store, and how he seemed reluctant to discuss certain aspects of the store's operations. By the end of their conversation, Zoe was convinced that Greg knew something about the illegal activities. But she also sensed a conflict in him, a hesitation that suggested he might not be a willing participant. As Zoe left the store, her mind was racing with new information and possibilities. This case was turning out to be more complex than she had anticipated. Not only was she dealing with a potential large-scale criminal operation, but she was also facing the man who had discriminated against her. A man who now seemed to be caught in the middle of something much bigger than himself. The lines between personal vendetta and professional duty were beginning to blur, and Zoe knew she would need all her skills and integrity to navigate the challenges ahead. As she walked back to her car, she couldn't help but wonder, could this case be an opportunity not just for justice, but for change? The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance as Greg sat in his car in the TechNow parking lot, his hands shaking as he held a stack of documents. He had spent the past week digging deeper into the store's financials, and what he found had left him feeling sick to his stomach. The evidence was clear. TechNow was at the center of a massive money laundering operation. Greg's mind raced with the implications. How long had this been going on? Who else was involved? And most importantly, what was he going to do about it? As he debated his next move, a knock on his car window made him jump. He looked up to see a face he recognized, the woman he had accused of shoplifting. But this time, she wasn't just an innocent customer. She held up an FBI badge, her expression a mix of determination and barely concealed anger. "Mr. Palmer, I'm Agent Zoe Washington with the FBI. We need to talk," she said, her presence filling the small space with tension. "I think you know why I'm here," she began. Greg nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "The money laundering," he said quietly. "So you are aware," Zoe replied, a note of surprise in her voice. "How long have you known?" Greg ran a hand through his hair, his face a mask of shame and regret. "I just figured it out last week. I've been gathering evidence, trying to decide what to do." Zoe studied him for a moment, gauging his sincerity. "And what about the incident with me? Was that part of your cover?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. Greg finally looked up, meeting Zoe's gaze. "No," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. That was just me being a prejudiced idiot. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I truly am sorry." Zoe felt a mix of emotions wash over her, anger at the reminder of that day, surprise at Greg's candor, and a grudging respect for his admission. "Mara, you're right. It doesn't change what happened," she said firmly. "But what you do next can make a difference. We need your help to bring down this operation, Mr. Palmer. Are you willing to cooperate?" Greg nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I want to make this right. Both the money laundering and how I treated you." As they began to discuss the details of the case, a tentative alliance formed between them. Zoe, while still wary, recognized the value of having an insider's perspective. Greg, for his part, felt a weight lifting as he committed to doing the right thing. As they parted ways that night, both Zoe and Greg knew that this was just the beginning. They faced a dangerous investigation, personal demons to overcome, and a journey that would test them both. But in that moment, in a dimly lit parking lot in Chicago, the first seeds of understanding and redemption had been planted. The following week saw Zoe and Greg forming an unlikely partnership. They met regularly in discreet locations around Chicago, quiet cafes in Wicker Park, secluded corners of Millennium Park, and once even on an architectural boat tour of the Chicago River, always mindful of potential surveillance. During these meetings, Greg shared everything he knew about TechNow's operations, from the intricate web of shell companies used to funnel money to the key players involved in the scheme. Zoe listened intently, her sharp mind piecing together the complex puzzle of the money laundering operation. As they worked side by side, the tension between them began to ease, replaced by a grudging respect. Greg found himself in awe of Zoe's intelligence and determination, while Zoe couldn't help but admire Greg's courage in coming forward. One evening, as they pored over financial documents in a small coffee shop in Lincoln Park, Greg paused, his face clouded with emotion. "You know," he began hesitantly, "my father was a cop, old school, tough as nails. He had some pretty strong opinions about race." Zoe looked up, her expression guarded. "And you followed in his footsteps?" Greg nodded, shame evident in his eyes. "I thought I was different, that I'd moved past all that. But that day in the store, I realized how much of his prejudice I'd internalized. I'm not proud of it, Zoe. I'm trying to be better." Zoe was quiet for a moment, processing Greg's words. Then, with a deep breath, she shared her own story. "My parents were civil rights activists in the 60s. They taught me from a young age that I'd have to work twice as hard to get half as far. When I joined the FBI, truly hearing for the first time the impact of systemic racism. Zoe, in turn, saw Greg's genuine desire to change and grow. Their conversation was interrupted by a text message on Greg's phone. His face paled as he read it. "What is it?" Zoe asked, instantly alert. "It's my boss," Greg replied, his voice shaky. "There's an emergency meeting at the store tonight. I think they might be onto us." Zoe's mind raced with possibilities. This could be our chance to gather concrete evidence, but it's risky. "Are you up for it?" Greg hesitated for just a moment before nodding firmly. "I'm in. Whatever it takes to make this right." As they hurriedly packed up their documents and prepared to face whatever lay ahead, both Zoe and Greg felt a shift in their relationship. They were no longer just reluctant allies, but partners united in a common cause. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but together, they felt ready to face whatever challenges came their way. The TechNow store glowed like a beacon in the Chicago night, its sleek facade hiding the web of corruption within. Zoe and Greg stood across the street, hidden in the shadows of a nearby alley, their hearts racing with anticipation and fear. "Remember the plan," Zoe whispered, her eyes fixed on the store's entrance. "Get in, plant the bugs, and get out. Don't take any unnecessary risks." Greg nodded, his hands shaking slightly as he pocketed the tiny recording devices Zoe had provided. "What if they suspect something? What if I can't get to all the locations?" Zoe placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, surprising herself with the gesture. "You've got this, Greg. You know the store better than anyone. Just stay calm and act natural." With a deep breath, Greg stepped out of the alley and walked towards the store. Zoe watched him go, a mixture of worry and hope churning in her stomach. She had come to rely on Greg over the past weeks, and the thought of him in danger made her more anxious than she cared to admit. Inside the store, Greg was immediately struck by the tense atmosphere. The usual bustling activity was replaced by hushed conversations and nervous glances. He made his way to the back office, nodding to colleagues as he passed, trying to keep his composure. The emergency meeting was already underway when Greg slipped into the room. Marcus Harding, the regional manager, was speaking in low, urgent tones. "We've got a problem," Marcus was saying, his eyes darting around the room. "Someone's been asking questions. We need to move the next shipment tonight." Greg's heart raced as he realized the magnitude of what he was witnessing. This was the break they needed. As the meeting continued, he carefully placed the bugs in strategic locations, his hands steady despite his fear. Outside, Zoe listened intently through her earpiece, her fingers flying over her laptop as she documented every word. The evidence was damning, implicating not just TechNow, but several high-ranking officials in a vast money laundering scheme. Suddenly, Zoe heard a commotion through the feed. "Hey, what's that?" someone yelled. Her blood ran cold as she realized Greg had been spotted. Inside, Greg found himself surrounded by suspicious faces. Marcus stepped forward, his expression dark. "What's going on, Palmer? What's that in your hand?" Time seemed to slow down as Greg weighed his options. In that moment, he thought of Zoe, of the trust she had placed in him, of the journey they had taken together. With a deep breath, he made his decision. "It's over, Marcus," Greg said, his voice surprisingly steady. "The FBI knows everything. I've been working with them." The room erupted into chaos. As Marcus lunged for Greg, the doors burst open, and Zoe led a team of FBI agents into the room. "FBI! Everybody freeze!" In the ensuing confusion, Greg managed to duck away from Marcus and make his way to Zoe's side. Together, they watched as the agents took control of the situation, arresting Marcus and his co-conspirators. As the dust settled, Zoe turned to Greg, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and admiration. "You did it," she said softly. "You stood up for what's right." Greg nodded, still processing the events of the night. "And I couldn't have done it without you, Zoe. You gave me the chance to be better, to do better." As they walked out of the store into the cool Chicago night, both Zoe and Greg felt the weight of their shared experience. They had started as adversaries, divided by prejudice and misunderstanding. Now, they stood side by side, united by a common purpose and a newfound respect for each other. The city skyline glittered in the distance, a reminder of the complex world they lived in, full of challenges, but also opportunities for growth and change. For Zoe and Greg, this was not just the end of a case, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where understanding and cooperation could triumph over prejudice and fear. In the days following the sting operation, Chicago buzzed with news of the TechNow scandal. The arrest of several high-profile businessmen and the exposure of a multi-million-dollar money laundering scheme made headlines across the city and beyond. Zoe found herself in the spotlight, praised for her skillful handling of the case. As she sat in her office at the FBI headquarters, surrounded by congratulatory messages and newspaper clippings, she couldn't help but reflect on the unexpected journey that had led her here. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Greg, looking both nervous and determined. "Come in," Zoe said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Greg sat down, his hands fidgeting slightly. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice sincere. "Not just for giving me the chance to make things right, but for opening my eyes. Working with you, it's changed me, Zoe." Zoe studied him for a moment, seeing the genuine transformation in the man who had once accused her of shoplifting. "You did the hard work, Greg," she replied. "You chose to confront your biases and take a stand. That takes courage." Greg nodded, a small smile on his face. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens next. I want to do more, to make a real difference. I was wondering if you might help me with that." Zoe leaned forward, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to start a program," Greg explained, his enthusiasm growing as he spoke. "Something that brings law enforcement and community members together, to break down barriers, build understanding. Your perspective would be invaluable." As Greg outlined his ideas, Zoe felt a spark of excitement. This was an opportunity to create lasting change, to turn their personal journey into something that could benefit others. "I'm in," Zoe said, a smile spreading across her face. "Let's make it happen." Over the next few months, and residents from diverse backgrounds, their program, which they named Bridge the Gap, quickly gained attention and support. Zoe found herself sharing her experiences as a Black woman and FBI agent, helping others understand the challenges and prejudices she had faced. Greg, in turn, spoke openly about his own journey of confronting and overcoming his biases. As they stood together at the podium during the launch event for Bridge the Gap, Zoe couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. From that tense confrontation in TechNow to becoming partners in promoting understanding and equality, their journey was a testament to the power of open minds and second chances. "Today," Zoe addressed the crowd, her voice strong and clear, "we're not just launching a program, we're starting a movement. A movement that recognizes that change begins with each one of us. It begins with the courage to confront our biases, the willingness to listen and learn, and the commitment to do better." Greg stepped up beside her, adding his own words. "Our story is proof that transformation is possible, that even in the face of prejudice and misunderstanding, there's room for growth, for redemption, for building bridges instead of walls." As applause filled the room, Zoe and Greg exchanged a look of mutual respect and friendship. They had started as adversaries, divided by prejudice and mistrust. Now, they stood united, a living example of the change they hoped to inspire in others. The Chicago skyline stretched out behind them, a fitting backdrop to their story of personal growth and societal change. In a city known for its diversity and its challenges, Zoe and Greg had found a way to turn a moment of conflict into a catalyst for positive change. As they left the stage, ready to mingle with the attendees and begin the real work of their program, both Zoe and Greg felt a sense of purpose and hope. They knew the road ahead would not be easy, that changing hearts and minds was a long and sometimes difficult process. But they were ready for the challenge, armed with their experiences, their newfound understanding, and the power of their unlikely friendship. In the end, their story was more than just about solving a crime or overcoming personal biases. It was a testament to the potential for change that exists in every interaction, every confrontation, every moment where we choose understanding over prejudice and unity over division. And in a world often divided by differences, that was a powerful message indeed.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.